Hey everybody, my name's Gilad Goldstein and I'm here today with Kenra Professional to show you how to create the feather cut. Now this cut's really highly requested in the salon right now, so it mixes soft wispy bangs with a little bit of graduated layering to create this really beautiful movement. I think about it whenever I have a guest who has an existing bob, they maybe want to make a slight change without adding too many dramatic layers. This cut's perfect for that. So you're going to learn how to create curtain bangs, how to layer the hair with graduation, and how to create airy texture that makes this feather cut feel really special. So grab a mannequin and grab your razor because we're going to get started with this razor cut. For this feather cut, we're going to get right into the sectioning. I've sectioned the hair into 4 quadrants, and now we're going to start to separate the back. So we have the left and the right sides, and we're going to start by separating the nape from the rest of the back. So you're going to rock the comb up the head, and you're looking for the place where the comb lifts off. From that point, I'm going to take a horizontal parting to separate the nape. Now we're going to separate the back from the crown. So once again, placing the comb flat on the head, and I'm looking for where the comb is lifting off the head. That change in direction tells me where the actual areas of the head are changing. So that'll be where I take my horizontal parting to split the crown from the back. I remember one of the first things that I learned when I was trying to master hair cutting was the areas of the head. And there's a lot of ways that you can section the hair, but I found that for creating the feather cut, it's really important to section into the areas of the head because there's so many different elements to the haircut. So because the feather cut has so many internal layers, separating into the areas of the head, make sure that we know where we're cutting so we can create the right layers in the right spots. Whether you're doing a bob cut, a feather cut, a butterfly cut, understanding the areas of the head is going to make it easier for you to map out your haircut so that you don't get lost. So if you're a stylist like me who likes to cut small subsections and take a long time, believe it or not, sectioning is actually going to help you speed up in the salon. So it keeps me organized and makes sure that I don't cut anything twice. So you can see we've separated the nape, the back, and the crown sections. Before we begin cutting, we're also going to section out the front. So what we're going to do is we're going to connect the line that we've created to separate the back and the crown to the front, and that's going to separate the top. Let's start with cutting the length. So for this feather cut, we're going to take the length right below the base of the neck. So whenever I'm cutting any perimeter length, I find it helpful to raise the guest so that I'm close to eye level. So while it's okay to bend down, sometimes it can make it really hard to get a nice even cut. So I'm gonna go ahead and raise my guest up so that I'm a little bit more level with where I'm cutting in the salon. Now we're gonna use a feather razor for this entire haircut. Kind of works with the feather cut vibe, but we're gonna take the length to just below the neck. So I'm going to take a small panel of hair and stand in front of my section. Once I'm in front, I'm just going to go to the ends of the hair and I'm going to skim until I remove length. So you're skimming and removing that length. Now the result that you're going to achieve will be something soft, but you'll still have a nice clean line in your haircut. The key is to make sure that your fingers are slightly below where you want the desired length to hit. So I'm positioning my fingers a little lower than where I want the actual length so that there's space for the razor to achieve that cut. The best part about this also is that we're avoiding creating any heavy blunt lines at the bottom. So any texturizing that we'll have to do at the back will be minimal. Now you want to keep your razor at somewhat of a 45-degree angle as you cut. Imagine that you're creating graduation in the hair, but you're still keeping the hair elevated very low. So we're just creating a little bit of graduation with the skimming, and that's done with the angle that we're holding our razor. So try to keep your angle at a slight 45. All right, so I feel pretty good about this length, and we're gonna start by setting the guide for our graduation. Now, here's the fun part. We're gonna take a small piece of hair from the top of the back section. So I'm just gonna grab a small piece of hair, and I'm gonna clip the rest out of the way. This is going to set the weight point for our layers. So if you view it from a side profile view, I don't want to overly layer the hair in this feather cut. It's kind of a soft graduation with a little bit of layering. So I want to keep the weight point of the layers pretty low. So if you look from this side view, we're going to keep our weight point closer to the mid shaft or the ends of the hair. Once you've determined where you want that layer to sit, you're going to cut it. So my weight point is going to be between the base of the neck and the occipital bone. So pull your fingers to the weight point, release any tension, and cut. That's going to be where our layers are going to lead to. So now we're going to check what angle we have to cut to connect the length to the layer guide. So when I'm holding this at a low elevation, I'm going to build graduation, and you can see this little corner that I'm going to have to cut, and that's going to ultimately connect into the top guide. So I'm going to take our section. I'm going to use my layer guide to visually see where I want to cut my layers, keeping the elevation very low, get rid of the guide, and now I'm just going to lightly layer the hair. Now this graduation will create a little bit of volume working towards the top. So we're going to repeat this process all throughout the bottom section. Remember, keep your elevation at 45 degrees so that you're building graduation. You shouldn't be taking a ton of hair off in this section because this is just building the weight up towards the top. If you find yourself cutting a lot of hair, I would suggest reassessing and just making sure that you're not removing too much because you'll end up with a lot more layers than you expect otherwise. So as we watch this happen here at the corner, this is where the head starts to round. So this is a point where we actually want to over direct back slightly. So if you imagine standing at the back corner of the head, pull that hair towards yourself. That's going to cause you to cut a square shape in your layers. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to over direct to the guide. Remember, your elevation is 45 degrees. And now we're just connecting to the layer. So really, you're standing in front of the section that you're cutting to avoid over directing in the back. It's only once you get to the corners that you start to over direct. So I'm just going to cut this layer, take another subsection. And then remember, at this back corner, we're gonna pull the hair square. So position your body at the back corner and then pull the hair square, pulling back. Keep your elevation low and then connect to your layer guide down to your length. At this point, you'll start to see the volume popping up at the ends. So you've just graduated a little bit more volume from the ends to the layers. Now we can start to connect the back sections. So release that back section and maintain the same elevation and the same over direction that we used. So I'm holding the section at 45 degrees, finding the guide from the bottom, and then connecting to that layer guide I created at the start. So we're standing in front, we find our guide, and let's connect. Now, when I think of the client that would love this kind of a haircut, maybe they already have an existing bob, or they are just looking for a little bit of a change. They want to try something with like the shaggy layers, but aren't really ready to commit to all that. So the great part about this feather cut is that it kind of marries the best of both worlds in a sense. So we're able to create a strong shape, but by creating this graduation and creating these soft layers with the razor, we're able to also give them a sense of shagginess without going too choppy, as if we were doing a full wolf cut or a butterfly cut. And in the salon, I'll often have people ask me, what is the difference between a wolf cut and a butterfly cut, or a wolf cut and a feather cut? And usually it's really about the structure. So this feather cut has a softer appearance in the layers, where when I think of a wolf cut, it's very structured, it's very strong with the fringe, and all of the layers are very prominent. Keep in mind with this haircut, it's going to be softer. So this is good for your guests who maybe like that look, but aren't ready to commit to a full structured look. This should also be a reminder too that if you notice yourself cutting a ton of hair or if the layers are getting very short, you might be cutting too much off. So keep that in mind as well, because we're not trying to cut so much hair off in this layering. We don't want the layers to get super short. So that's why we're keeping the hair low. And that's why we're pointing our fingers towards the guide that we created at the start. Don't forget, once you reach this back corner, to pull that square. So this is key. If we don't pull the square, what will happen is we'll create shortness by the ears. So the hairline curves right here. If I don't pull this back, we're going to get a shape in the perimeter that mimics the hairline. So by pulling the hair back, we're actually over-directing, and that maintains more length in the opposite direction that we're cutting. So this means that we can create an even shape all the way around, despite the hairline curving all the way up. So once this dries, it ends up being a little bit more on the even side, rather than curving. That area is sometimes known as the hole that we cut whenever we're doing a bob. If we keep doing even sections out here, you may have seen that there's a hole in the perimeter. That's why that happened, because the hairline curved. So in the feather cut or a bob cut, you can use the same principle by pulling the hair square. And no matter where you're cutting, it's going to help you maintain that little bit of extra length where the hair begins to become less dense. And that's going to keep a stronger look to your perimeter. So now that we finished layering the back area, I'm just checking my lengths, making sure everything is balanced, and I'm visually looking where I've built the weight to. So if you look from this back zone, you'll start to see where we've graduated that layer. So that's our guide, and now it's going all the way around the haircut. So now that we finished cutting the back, we're going to start to get into the sides. So you can release the side section and comb it into natural fall. Remember, the feather cut kind of mixes a strong bob shape with some of the shaggy elements of a wolf cut. So we're going to create a strong perimeter, but then we're going to start to etch in a little bit of face framing layers. Position your body in front of the subsection, and then pull the hair down, find the guide from the back, and then cut. This time while I'm cutting, instead of skimming the section, I'm just holding the razor at an angle and chopping from back to front. That's going to create little notches that give a little bit of piecey texture to the very ends. But it's also going to allow us to create a more precise and clean line, especially as we get to the front where we want it to be a little bit more soft and a little bit more structured. So again, on the other side, just gonna release the section, comb it down into natural fall, and then stand in front of your subsection. Comb the hair down, and from the guide in the back, angle your razor and cut the length. Beautiful. And go to the front. Now I always like to stand in the front and check visually for balance. So I'm gonna pull the hair down. It's looking like this side is a little bit longer, so I'm just gonna go back in and we'll refine if there's any excessive length to cut. Now before we move on to the top sections, we're gonna do a little bit of layering in this front area. So remember, the feather cut is characterized by some of the face framing layers, but it's also not super choppy or super intense. So we wanna layer the hair in a soft way that feels airy and light, but also has a shaggy element to it. So what this says to me is that I'm going to create layers and face framing, but in a graduated elevation. Stand in front of the head and pull your sides forward. You're looking to get a 45-degree angle. Now, you want to make sure that the length drops out because we don't want to disturb the length that we just cut. So when you see that length drop out right behind the ear, now you know where you can start to blend in your face framing layers. And I'm just using the razor, taking longer strokes to create a soft face framing effect. Great. We'll do the same thing on the other side. Now, if you have someone who has very thick hair and they want to remove weight while face framing, you can do even longer strokes than before. And that's going to take out a ton of that weight, but you'll still be able to maintain that length. It's just going to create a softer, more feathered effect. So the longer your strokes, the more texture you're going to create. But always make sure that you're stroking the razor down to that final end length so that you don't take off too much hair. Cool. Great. Now you can see these little layers starting to pop out. They're face framing, it's beautiful, but it's not super drastic or dramatic. Now we can move on to the top. For the top sections, we're going to take pie-shaped sections. We're going to continue the line of graduation that we created at the bottom. So hold the hair straight out of the head, pull it down to 45 degrees, and look for the guide for your layers. Once you found the guide, you can graduate the hair. At this point, I would recommend doing longer strokes so that you can get a little bit more texture. But on a guest who has fine hair, it might be better to take shorter strokes. So think about that. When you're using a razor, think about the client you're working with. Maybe the client isn't even an ideal candidate for the razor. And in that case, you can do the same technique and cutting pattern just by using a shear. So I'm working with medium hair texture. That means I can use a razor, and it kind of works to create that feathered effect without a lot of excessive texturizing at the very end. Now remember, we're holding the hair square once we get to the back corners, but maintaining that same elevation, looking for that cutting line for our guide, and then cutting. Now, this is why it was so important that we set our weight point up at the very start of the haircut. So you saw how we created that intentional weight point right above the length. That is so that we didn't cut these layers too short at the very top. So now we have a really good guide so that we know we can cut this hair and continue that graduation to build volume, but we're not going to be taking the layers so short that she feels like she has a shag. So I'm feeling really good about this graduation. There's one last step before we move on to the top. We're going to take subsections in the back here. So the same subsections that we were working with before. And we're just going to do this on the very top of the hair. See this corner of graduation and weight that we built up here? We're just going to soften that out ever so slightly. So I'm pulling that hair straight out in this little corner right here. I'm just going to cut away. Now this may seem like a super small and minuscule step, but it's one of the most important steps to this cut. The reason that we need to do this is because we don't want to have any sort of bump of weight going on in the back. It's okay if there's a little volume, but what we don't want to have when we blow dry is this huge chunk that we need to overly texturize. So this is going to help release some of that excessive weight, so that way there's no crazy lines that we need to take out once the hair is dry. And it's really just the smallest amount of hair that we're removing from the top. So if you're taking off a lot, definitely take a step back, double check, don't cut, because this is just supposed to be a small amount of weight from the very top, just to diffuse that weight line. So in here, don't need to do any cutting. You're just looking for that corner. If you see a corner of weight building up, that's all you're cutting. So right there, it's a little corner. And then for the last section, small little corner right here, and we're just gonna cut that. So now we're gonna connect these top sections to the layers we created in the back. Now we're just cutting the top, so we're gonna take vertical partings, and we're going to over direct to this back corner. So I'm pulling this straight out, over directing to the corner, and we're finding that length that we cut in the back. So I'm pulling this hair straight out, going down to our 45-degree elevation, and I found the cutting line from the back layers, so I'm just going to connect. We're going to pull all the following subsections to that guideline. So remember that back corner that we stand in front of to maintain that length in the front. We're pulling the hair that direction, and then using the cutting line from the back as our guide. Now that we connected the layers to the back, we're going to connect them to the front. Start with the diagonal parting that works behind the hairline. You're going to look for where you started to create that face framing, and now we're just going to connect it. So hold the hair up vertically. You're going to look for that face framing guide that you created, and you're going to hold the hair down at a low elevation. We're just going to connect these front layers to that guide. I'm going to take another subsection right behind the first, and we're pulling to that front stationary guide. Now my body is positioned square to the front corner of the head. So I'm actually pulling that hair in the center a little bit outside towards the corners. That's leaving a little bit more length in the center, so if your guest doesn't really want to achieve a bang, or if she doesn't want to add any extra short pieces, it's a good way to maintain that. The feather cut traditionally has bangs, so we are going to cut those in, but this is a great way to create the base of the haircut and give your guests the option whether or not they want to add bangs, because some of them might not want to make that commitment yet. But we're just connecting the layers all the way to the bottom guide. So that's what your front should look like right now. And I love cutting the front this way because it just styles so effortlessly. I think this haircut works really well for those clients who are looking for something that feels like a style but isn't super high maintenance. So the great part about this is while it does look good styled out, you can do a blowout, you can flat iron, curl it. It looks great when you just air dry it as well. And I think that's the pinnacle of a good haircut. If you can air dry the cut, makes your clients really happy, also makes it easy to style so that they can have a lot of different options. Now we're going to repeat the same process on the other side. So the first step is to pull the hair back and connect to the corners, and then we're going to pull the hair forward and connect to the front. So now your face framing should kind of arc around the face. So you kind of have an arc in your face framing. It'll be shorter in the center, a little bit longer to the outer corners, but we just connected to that bottom perimeter length that we set at the start. Now we're going to add a little bit of layering in the very top. So we're going to layer the top. I'm taking a vertical section in the center, and we're going to create just a little bit of layering from that front guide to the back. So what you're going to do is you're going to pull the hair forward, and you're looking at what you created. So you can see I already created a little bit of layering here. I'm just going to add a little bit extra just by palming the hair and slicing. Now you're going to take the rest of the top section, not including the sides, and you're going to pull it towards that center subsection. Remember, pull the hair forward. That's going to maintain a lot of length, so you're just layering the very front. And I'm just notching into the ends a little bit to add a little bit of extra layers on top. Now the final piece to the haircut is to add in the wispy bangs, and this is what makes it a feather cut. So we're going to take a small amount of hair in the very front for our bang. I like to look for the outer corner of the eye, and from that point, I'm just going to take a vertical parting up the head. So you're going to end up with a really small triangle in the center subsection of the head. So I'm looking where the outer corner of the eye is, and then if you placed your comb vertically from that corner and rocked it up the head, that's going to tell you where to take your parting to section off the fringe. This should be a little smaller than your traditional fringe section because while we are creating a soft bang, we don't want it to feel super exaggerated or super thick because it's going to turn it into a wolf cut. So make sure that whatever hair you're grabbing, it's not too much, but just enough to give them a little bit of a bang without them feeling fully committed. Now to create the bang, we're going to over direct the entire subsection to the center. You want to determine your length before you do this cut. So you're going to be pulling the hair towards that center length. What I would do first is find a small piece in the front and determine where you want that shortest length of the bang. So I want the shortest length of the bang to sit probably at the bridge of the nose. I'm going to take the razor, I'm just going to slice that away. Once we have our guide, now we can over direct sections to that guide. So I'm going to take the entire triangle section, over directing it towards the guide, and I'm going to make a vertical cut. You should be standing in front of your section as you comb the hair, making sure that your body is positioned square and center to the face. Once the hair is combed and we found our guide, you're going to just slice the hair away with the razor. Now when you comb the hair out, you've created a little mini curtain bang. And keep in mind, we're creating a softer, wispier bang, so it might feel like just a little bit of hair, but that's what we're looking for. We don't want it to feel too heavy or too square and strong. We want this nice, soft, feathered effect. So once we have the base of the bang cut, now we're ready to dry, and then we're gonna get into some dry cutting. I'm applying some of the Kenra blow dry spray just to get a little bit of heat protection started. Also, it adds a nice shine to the hair and helps speed up that blow dry. And then this product is my favorite for styling feather cuts. This is the Silkening Heat Cream. I use it whenever I'm looking to create a smooth effect, but I still want to have a little bit of volume and bounce. This gives heat protection as well as styling support so that the feather cut can really show off all those layers, but still feel very soft and seamless. Now, we did do these layers in the front, and as you can see, they're still feeling a little heavy, so we're gonna do some personalizing. What I love about the feather cut is that it's one of those styles that when you tuck the hair behind your ear, you're supposed to have a lot of nice soft pieces that frame the face. So I'm gonna just tuck the hair behind the ear, and if it doesn't stay, you can always take a little clip or a creaseless clip. Just keep that hair back there for now. And we're going to look at what we have here. So it feels really heavy right by the face, and then it's a little bit lighter towards the ends. What that tells us is we have to remove a little bit of weight right where it feels more dense. So I'm gonna pull a small piece of hair, and we're going to customize a soft face framing piece. As you're cutting, make sure your angle of your shear is pointing towards the face, and that's gonna create some graduation as you cut the softness in. The goal is not to remove too much length, but you do wanna make sure that you're layering the hair ever so slightly. So the angle of your shear is gonna determine how that layer falls towards the face. If I were to kick the shear out, that's going to cause the hair to kick out. So in the face frame area, since I want it to sit closer towards the face, that's why our shear is pointing in, and that way any layering we create enhances that look. Now, if you really need to remove any blunt lines here, you can go ahead, recomb, and now you can see the ends. Just make some soft point cuts to diffuse any lines that you don't want. So it's already starting to feel softer. I can still feel a little bit of density, so here's one more technique that you can use. Go ahead and insert your shear at the midpoint of the strand. Make a small channel and close. Move your way across the strand, taking small channels of hair and closing the shear. Now watch this. As I comb that hair out, see the little bit of hair that's still in my fingers? That's controlled weight removal. So I'm making sure that I'm holding the section as I remove the weight, and then I'm able to pull the hair out and see how much texture I've created. Now, this kind of takes us away from the chaotic texturizing that we're traditionally used to doing at the end of a haircut, and it gives us a little bit more of a structure as to what we're doing. So I always love to hold that hair, really see what I'm removing, and it also helps because your guest and your client can see what you've removed as well, so they feel a little bit more comfortable with the texturizing. Now, once you feel satisfied with the face framing, you can start to move on to the rest of the hair. So I'm going to start working behind that first section. We're going to take diagonal subsections and comb them forward. The idea is to release the weight in the front of the face. So that's why we're combing the hair forward, because all of the texturizing is going to happen in the very front. So I'm going to stand in the front, and that way you can pull the hair forward. Now we're just taking the hair, making slight channel cuts, and removing the weight. Remember to release the section so you can see what you've cut. And then if you want to soften out any excess lines, go ahead and refine those with a deep parallel point cut. The goal is to create negative space, so if there's anything that feels too solid, that tells you exactly where you need to do any texturizing. But sometimes you might have a client who has finer density or finer texture and maybe low density hair, and that guest might not need as much of this excessive texturizing. So if you think about it, a guest who has fine hair, if we do all these techniques, what do you think is going to happen? It's not going to feel as full, right? So make sure that you're really customizing this to the hair that you're working with, and especially the client you're working with. Kind of brings us to another point as well, is like that consultation or that communication. So whenever we're doing a cut that has a lot of texture, a lot of layers, face framing, make sure you're on the same page with your client before you even start, because the minute you start to cut layers too short, you can't go back. So make sure you're on the same page. I'm going to do one more subsection behind this and just repeat the same process until I have the nice even density all the way through this side. Now make sure as you're working that you're not going to over texturize that first layer. So any of the hair that we're cutting at this point is only hair that hasn't been texturized. So imagine texturizing the same haircut 2 or 3 times. You're probably not going to have much hair left on the head. So make sure that each subsection you're texturizing alone. That way you don't over texturize a section and end up with a lot of holes in your haircut. So I'm going to start by cutting the center of the bang, and we're just going to point cut into the ends. So I don't want to create a ton of extra short pieces in here because the length is already short. It's wispy because of the density. So if you're texturizing a lot into a bang because there's a lot of hair in that section, that means the section was just too large. The density of the bang itself should be slim because of the amount of hair we cut. So make sure that you do your bang section properly so you don't have to cut a lot of short hairs into it. And you're just looking for that perimeter edge so that you can refine it with a deep point cut. So I love that it kind of kicks out a little bit. You can blow dry it in. I kicked it out on purpose to kind of give a little bit of a scoop with the blow dry. But what we want to do now is take this hair and just soften out any of the edges that feel a little blunt and remove any weight that feels excessive or bulbous. So I'm going to start taking diagonal subsections within the internal parts of the hair, taking small sections that mimic what we cut at the start of the shape. So we graduated the shape by holding it at 45 degrees. So that's where I'm going to hold the hair, and we're going to make our channel cuts. Next section, and channel cut. And I'm just going to repeat this process until I've removed enough density that it feels light and airy. So for this feather cut, it should have that structure of a bob. It should feel shaggy like a wolf cut, but you want all the edges to feel light and airy. So refine as much as needed to take out any bluntness and to get that texture that you're looking for. Here's the feather cut all styled. I added in some Kenra Platinum Silkening gloss to get this piecey texture. Whenever we're looking to enhance layers, especially in a feather cut, I think an oil works really well to give a touchable finish while still really creating that piecey texture that makes it feel edgy. So as you can see, the graduation in the back has created this really beautiful buildup of weight, And then we've kicked out the ends just for a little bit of movement. It's also very characteristic of a feather cut. And then we also have those nice, soft, wispy bangs that just give it a really flattering finish. Thank you so much for watching the feather cut. I hope you learned something. And if you did, make sure to leave a comment about what you learned. And if you loved this content, make sure to follow Kenra Professional for more, and I'll see you in the next video.